Hello all. I hope you're doing well. I hope there's been no turmoil with anyone this week. I'm sure there has, because that's just part of life on earth, but nonetheless, I hope that you sought Yahweh through it and didn't let it defeat you. I've had some struggles myself this week and have failed multiple times. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. There are some verses through Scripture that talk about a 3.5-year period in the future. And I'll list 7 of them at least in the description. But what I'm here to cover is specifically what is a year in the Bible. And there's only one verse, to my knowledge, in the book of Revelation that tells us how many days are in 3.5 years. And there's a common misunderstanding about that, and I've heard or read, because I've been doing a little searching about this here lately, that there's a difference between a Jewish year and the number of days that it takes the earth to go around the sun, because that's what we here in the United States and other countries, I suspect, base a year on. Well, I'm going to tell you that back in Moses' day and before that, all the way up until a certain period of Joshua being in charge, 3.5 years would have been 1,260 days. Sorry about that. One of my dogs has decided that he likes to bark at things. But if you take 1,260 days and divide it by 3.5, that actually gives you 360 days instead of 365 days. And so, hush! There's a common thought process that a Jewish scriptural or ceremonial year is 360 days, and that an actual year is 365 days. Well, I'm here to tell you that both are true. And I know that sounds like a contradiction, but first let me where is that? I'm sorry, wrong device. I brought 2 devices out so I could. So the 1,260 days is actually in Revelation 11:3. It says, "And I will give power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth." All right. Well, a score is 20 years, so 60 would be 60 years. So 60 days. Right. 60 is 60, because a score is 20. 3 times 20 is 60. So they shall prophesy 1,260 days. All right. But we know that that is supposed to be 3.5 years, because it's listed in at least 3 other scriptures that it'll be 3.5 years. You know, it talks about how Satan is going to stop the daily oblation and declare himself to be Yahweh after the first 3.5 years and stuff like that, which I'm not here to talk about those prophecies or what they mean or try to interpret them or anything like that. But I'm here to talk about the number of days in a year. And currently it does take 365 days for the earth to go around the sun one time. But, you know, we try to figure out when Yahweh's feasts are supposed to be held. And there are at least 2 independent calendars that I'm aware of that are circulating. And I don't know which one to go by. There are arguments on whether we're supposed to be counting days based on when the barley goes Aviv, whichever way you pronounce it, or want to pronounce it, because I think it's actually spelled 2 different ways. But, you know, suffice it to say, when the barley is headed up and I think it's ripe and getting ready to just before being plucked, I'm not sure. But, you know, it says that that's supposed to be the first day of the year, right? And, you know, that happens near the fall because you plant it in the spring, it goes through the summer, and it's ready to be picked close to the end of the summer, towards fall. So, the reason that these events don't happen on the same day every year is because a solar year is not now what it is supposed to be. It changed. And it changed during a certain event in Israel's history. And that would be the book of Joshua, chapter 10, verses 12 and 13. I'll list this in the description down below, along with the other 7 verses, scriptures. But to read them right quick. Then spake Joshua to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel, and he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou moon in the valley of, I can't pronounce that word, it's Ajlon. Ajalon, sounds right? Seems right. Verse 13, and the sun stood still, and the moon stayed until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. Is not this written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven, and hasted not to go down about a whole day. All right, well, it says about a whole day. So we can take that to mean that it stayed up whatever you consider the daylight hours to be for a normal regular day, for whatever time of year it was then. The sun stayed up twice as long over Israel at that time. And the only thing that it takes to cause that to happen is a minor shift in the Earth's orbit. You know, it could have shifted away from the sun just a little bit, or, you know, a large enough passing asteroid or another planet that's in our solar system may have had a different orbit. And that's actually what I lean towards. Is I believe that the orbits of Earth and Mars were at least at one point closer together as they went around the sun. And so if the Earth was leading Mars in their orbital paths, then energy would transfer from Earth to Mars via the gravitational pull. You know, imagine it being like a rope connected between a fast runner and a slow runner. All right, so what's going to happen is the fast runner is going to pass the slow runner. Well, that rope connecting them together is going to slow the fast runner down, but it's going to speed the slow runner up at the same time. So there's a transfer of energy through that gravitational pull. So if the Earth leads Mars, then Mars is forward motion speeds up and the Earth's forward motion slows down. So, if it goes the other way, then Mars would be pulling on Earth, so Mars would slow down and the Earth would speed up. Alright? So imagine during that long day of Joshua that if Mars was in the right location at the right time, which I'm fully aware that Yahweh can make things to work out the way that He wants them to, and I wholly believe that He did work this out in this way, that the Earth was leading Mars and it slowed it down in its orbital motion enough to add 5 days to a solar year. And for whatever reason, the orbits have shifted so the planets don't come that close together anymore. So all that being said, at some point in the future, something is going to happen to cause the Earth's forward motion to slow down, and it's going to be in the right place at the right time so that we once again have 12 months with 30 days in each month. So when it comes time for the feast to occur, we'll know years in advance when they're going to happen, just based on the counting of days, just like we keep up with the weekly Sabbath right now. You know, it happens every 7th day, and it's easy to keep up with. And you know, Scripture says that you know, I'll quote the King James. It's simple and easy to remember, and most people know it and accept it as being at least mostly accurate. But Scripture says that God, or Yahweh, is not a God of confusion. But look at all the confusion that we have about the days when the feasts are supposed to happen and stuff like that right now. Alright? Well, that's not of Him. You know, He's not the cause of the confusion. You know, evil is the cause of the confusion, literally, because the whole need for the solar year to have changed was to give Joshua enough daylight hours to chase down the evil and destroy it and put an end to it. At least the evil that he was battling at the time. So I can't go back and quote historical sources. There are historical sources to explain, or maybe not explain, but to show that different times through history, the planet Mars was much, much closer to Earth. And they had land tides. We actually have land tides in the world today. Most people aren't aware of them. But take, for example, if you go out in your yard and dig a hole when the moon is, you know, when you can see the moon in the sky, when you go to fill that hole back up, you'll have extra dirt. You'll have more dirt than it takes to fill the hole up. I know this sounds crazy, but it's true. Trust me, I've done this myself. And if you dig a hole in your yard, and I'm not talking about a couple of spoonfuls of dirt, I'm talking about take a shovel and dig out a hole the size of a 5-gallon bucket or so. But if you dig a hole when the moon is on the opposite side of the earth from where you're digging the hole, you will not have enough dirt to fill the hole back up. You know, it's the moon that causes the tides in the ocean because of its gravitational pull. Well, it does the same thing in the ground, just not enough where we can actually feel it ourselves. But it's evident based on the hole, and that is not an old wives' tale. It is scientific fact. But you can go back and look through history and find where people throughout history have seen the planet Mars in enough detail before there was any such thing as a telescope, or people understood lensing and how to build optical devices to see long distances. You know, before the invention of any of that stuff, there are historical writings that detail out things about Mars that you couldn't know without direct observation. For example, the number of its moons, the rotation of the moons, and stuff like that. In fact, Dr. Chuck Missler goes into some detail about this, and he mentions the book Gulliver's Travels, because the two moons of Mars are mentioned in Gulliver's Travels, and their rotational dynamics are given, I think, in that book. But, you know, he goes on to say that the reflectivity of those two moons, or, you know, how we see Earth's moon when the sun shines on it, well, we can't see Mars's moons like that because they have an extremely low reflectivity. You know, they're very dark, broken up surfaces. They don't reflect light very well. You know, it's like seeing a piece of black cloth at night versus a piece of white cloth at night. You know, you can see the white one a lot easier than you can see the black one. So essentially the same thing with Mars's two moons. But yeah, Dr. Chuck Missler goes on about that at some length, and he references Gulliver's Travels, and that book was written before telescopes and whatnot, so that we didn't have the ocular aids to be able to see things far off like that. With, at least not with any accuracy of detail. But so, in order for him to have known that, he would have to have had some source material that was written at a time when people could somehow or another see those moons without the aid of ocular devices. And the only way that that could happen is Earth and Mars would have to have been closer together. Now, if you take all that into account, that could also explain there's I don't remember the verses. I will try to find them. I will try to find them and try to remember to put them in the description below the video as well. Maybe not the entire verse, but at least references to the verses so you can look them up yourself. Because I'd rather you did that anyway. You know, Acts chapter 17, verses 10 and 11. Receive the word with all readiness, but search the scriptures to prove those things. You know, don't take my word for it. And 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15. So at some point in the future, some celestial event is going to happen to slow the Earth's precession around the sun back down to where we have 360-day years again. And it's going to happen at the right time and in the right season and on the right day for us to know unequivocally when the feasts are going to happen and when they're supposed to happen and stuff like that. Because like right now, you know, it's Sukkot or Feast of Tabernacles. And there's so much argument and backbiting about when it's supposed to be and stuff like that. You know, was the first day of it Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday? And I'm speaking Gregorian calendarly, just for for sake of understanding. Or, you know, so which day was the first day of it, and when is the last day of it? Because I was told again that it's either, I took Tuesday to be the day of rest this week, And I can't remember, I was told a while ago that it's either Tuesday or Wednesday of this coming week is another Sabbath to not be worked on. I can't keep up with it, and I've read through the instructions on keeping these Yahweh's feast and when you're supposed to keep them and stuff like that, and I can't make heads or tails of it. You know, because the moon goes around the earth based on a 28-day cycle. Well, it's supposed to be based on a 30-day cycle. Again, that has to do with the change of the orbital dynamics of Earth. And not only that, but again, just like when the two planets come close to each other and there's a transfer of energy from one planet to the other, well, there's also a transfer of energy from that planet's moon to the other planet, or moons, you know, whichever way it works. So it is entirely possible that Mars slowed down Earth enough to make it take 365.25 days to go around the sun, and at the same time slowed the Earth's moon down to make it take, or no, not slowed it down, but sped it up. My apologies. Sped it up to make it take 28 days to complete a full cycle instead of it being on a 30-day cycle. Now, I'm not enough of an astrophysicist to sit down and explain all this stuff out to you in excruciating detail, but just based on what it says in Scripture, that 3.5 years is 1,260 days, or is it 1,000? I don't remember. No, this is the wrong one. Wrong device. I know I've already said it in the video, but 1,260 days. So 1,203 days. So, you know, everything will be corrected when Messiah returns. He's going to teach us everything that we need to know. And there's nothing wrong with going to extra biblical historical sources when seeking out fact. You know, when looking for things like, did the Earth and Mars used to pass close enough together? And I'm not talking about recent stuff. I'm talking about, you know, Josephus and Philo, I think his name was. You know, go back to ancient Egyptian stuff. And I know you're thinking, well, all that stuff is pagan. I'm not talking about going back and learning about the way that they worshipped their demonic gods and stuff like that. I'm just talking about, if you read the history with discernment, the history that the Egyptians wrote, not history that modern man has written about the Egyptians, but actually, as directly as you can, read Egyptian history, or you know, whatever ancient culture you can find, read their writings, not a modern interpretation of their writings. And by interpretation, I'm not talking about language translation and whatnot. I'm talking about understanding interpretation. Like so many people will take, let's say, Acts chapter 10 to say that God made all things clean to eat. Well, when you read on down to, I think it's verse 26, Peter explains it for us. And then if you read chapter 11, it's explained in chapter 11 again. You know, so if you take the one verse, I think it's 16, and apply your own, I can eat what I want to, meaning to it, well, you incorrectly interpreted it. So I'm not saying to take their interpretation. I'm just saying to look at the translation and, you know, pray about it, because the Father will lead you to truth. And once you grasp these things, they're not that hard to understand anyway. I'm not very good at explaining them. I apologize. But this video has gotten away from me. Time has. I appreciate you all listening to them. I thank you much. Like and subscribe. Share them with your friends. Even if you don't agree, you know, just share them with your friends and tell your friends how big an idiot you think I am and stuff like that. I don't make any money on them. I don't ever plan to make any money on them. I'm not looking for fame and popularity. I only hope to serve the Father according to His will. All that being said, remember what I mentioned earlier, Acts chapter 17 verses 10 and 11, 2 Timothy chapter 2 verse 15, Proverbs 18:13, and Proverbs 18:21. You know, those are my key go-to verses that I try to use to keep me on Yahweh's path. Or, you know, to be reminders to stay on Yahweh's path, I should say. And reminders of how to stay on Yahweh's path. So, all that being said, I hope to see you all in the kingdom of heaven. Yahweh bless.